Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's session, Top Vulnerabilities Found in Microsoft 365 Environments. My name is Joelle Palmer, and I'm the Senior Marketing Manager here at CoreView. Before we get started, I want to cover a few housekeeping rules. To start, to avoid interruptions during the podcast, all audience phone lines are on mute. In your audio panel, you may select to listen to this broadcast using your computer speakers, or you may select the telephone option to view the dial-in number. If time permits, our session will include live Q&A at the end of the presentation. You may submit your questions at any time during the presentation using the questions panel located to the right of your screen. Finally, we'll email a link to the recording playback to all attendees on today's broadcast within the next few business days. Now I'll pass it over to the President of Data Link Networks, Don Wisdom. Don, take it away.
Thank you very much, Joelle. We are very happy to be here and happy that you are here to share with you this webinar, a peek under the hood, what's really happening in your Microsoft 365 environment. As Joelle mentioned, my name is Don Wisdom. I'm President of Data Link Networks, and I am joined here by Colby Norwood, our Sales Enablement Manager at Data Link Networks, and Roy Martinez, the Solutions Architect and Technology Evangelist at CoreView. So with that, I would like to get started here. I'm going to pass this off here to Colby. Why don't you, before we do that, I'm going to get into Data Link Networks. Who are we? We're a national managed service provider. We provide managed services in cybersecurity, data center services, networking, and especially Microsoft. We are a Microsoft solutions partner around modern workspace technology, and we also are a gold partner for Lenovo and a premier partner for Barracuda. With that, Colby, take it away.
Muted. That never gets old. Thank you, Don. Thank you all for being here. We're going to be discussing benchmarking, a peek under the hood, discussing that around the CoreView management platform. 20 years ago, I'll tell you guys, I wouldn't imagine I'd be here. You probably would have found me, somewhere around 2002, about 16 years old, staring at a screen. That's me. really close to the screen. I can imagine my mom knocking on the door saying, "Colby, back up, take a couple steps back and sit down." And then after that, shortly saying, "You've been on this for 4 or 5 hours, go outside." If you saw me then, you'd know that I didn't know exactly what I was doing, but I was looking at data. Sports really were my first love. This is Madden in 2002, and what I used to do is just build teams. Literally going through fantasy drafts and looking at data all day long, attributes, speed, catch ability, throwing power. This is 22. The Buccaneers have just won the Super Bowl, so Warren Sapp is the best player, but I'm sure you recognize some of the names: Peyton Manning, Junior Seau, David Carr. What I did after that was I'd just play the game. I wouldn't actually play it, but what I'd do is I'd watch the team play itself. I'd look at statistics. Over time, it got much better. This is 2018 Madden, and as you can tell, technology got better. You can notice that they've added a lot more visibility about what actually happens. And so now you've got how many QBs you've selected, how much time is left, a number of players. You've got a better selection, a better opportunity to see everything in one screen. And that's what CoreView does for you. Truthfully, over time, we've noticed that Microsoft is very tough to work with. And what CoreView has changed is that instead of it taking someone of really high level, someone like Roy Martinez, solution architect extraordinaire, to manage things for you, you can have someone like myself with not a whole lot of experience. And some of the statistics that we've seen over time in using CoreView are just what we're seeing in front of us right now. What CoreView really has done is make these statistics very easily to track over time. And what we like to do is use CoreView not just for the simple things like, hey, let me find out how many licenses are being used across the board, but also we can go in depth into things about passwords and things about failed logins. There are a number of screens that will give you insight that otherwise you'd have to jump to multiple screens to be able to see. With that, I'll let Roy Martinez tell you a little bit more about CoreView and what it's best used for.
Thanks, Colby. Yeah, I love that anecdote, man. I'm sad to say I go all the way back to like Madden 97, 98, so a little bit older on the chart there, but I definitely feel that. So as he said, my name is Roy Martinez. I'm a solutions architect at CoreView. I'm kind of doing a marketing role these days and working as a so-called technology evangelist. All that means is that I love CoreView and I relish opportunities like this to come online with our partners and kind of spread the gospel, so to speak, of what this platform can do for people like yourselves. And the way that we do that, the way that we collect the statistics that Colby is alluding to, is we have something that we call a health check that is basically a way for us to immediately provide ROI for even the notion of talking to us. And we get a quick read connection to a client's tenant, and we pull back as much data as we can without being too invasive. And we do some statistical analysis against that data to identify trends, to identify points where there may be opportunity for rationalization or opportunity for tightening of security, for instance. And a lot of what we're going to talk about today is kind of keyed on this notion of health checks. And what we've done in preparation for this is we went and performed health checks for a huge subset of our client base. In fact, pretty much the entirety of our client base, if I'm being honest. And what that means is that we were able to get literally, almost millions of users worth of data from a variety of tenants, spanning the gamut from incredibly small organizations of under 1,000 users to huge enterprises that are, in the 40,000 plus user size. And we found some interesting things, and it wasn't really specific to any particular vertical or industry either. We work with quite a few different verticals. So as you can see here in this little pie breakdown, everything from state and local government to education, higher ed, the private sector, obviously, lots of healthcare. So we're seeing a really interesting subset of customer environments. But what we notice after pulling all this data is that there are commonalities against all of these in terms of where the security, target points really are. The things that we should be caring about, and the things that should be top of mind for any enterprise is kind of a ubiquitous concept. So whether it's a tiny environment to the huge enterprises of the world, the things that we need to care about from a security angle are generally the same, and that's what we're going to talk about. So let's talk about some of the most common security issues that we do find. And we've highlighted a couple of bullet points for this presentation. The first and most kind of prevalent and most top of mind for anybody is obviously going to be failed logins and what we call a password audit. So making sure that passwords are being managed and controlled and governed in the way they should. I'm going to take the opportunity here just to jump into the CoreView platform to show you the way that we can kind of parse this information, just to give you a sense of the kind of powerful reporting is available to you through Data Link. Let me just jump in here, and what you should see, hopefully, if I've done this correctly, is you should see the wonderful CoreView backend interface. So I've got a couple of reports that I've saved here. I won't bore you with the details of orientation to the platform. We can go there if you need to later, but basically I got a few reports here that are interesting to me that we did as part of our health check process. And I'm looking for, let's just say, user passwords here. So right now what I can do is run a report, and this report is showing all 14,000 plus users in this particular tenant. This is a huge demonstration tenant. But what I can do is I can see information about whether or not a strong password is required for a user, whether or not those users have their password set to never expire, when was the last time that password was changed, and also things like the last time there was actual activity in Microsoft 365. Being able to call all this information together into a single report and pivot on it and make dynamic analysis based on it lets me do some really interesting things. And with this information, we're able to carve up and identify, are you adhering to the best practices for password maintenance? Are you in need of, putting in controls around how often your passwords are updated, things of this nature. So it really gives us a cool insight into how passwords are managed for our customers. Another really cool report is just as simple as failed sign-ins. Now, failed sign-ins is one of those topics that we could probably spend an entire hour webinar on, but obviously we want to know, a failed sign-in is a fine thing when it's just 1 to 5 to 10 times, but when you're talking hundreds, if not thousands of failed sign-ins over a period of time or from a specific subset of your organization, these are calls for alarm. These are places that we want to focus our attention. There could be any reason for it. It could be justified, but knowing that information is really, as G.I. Joe says, I'd say more than half the battle. And CoreView gives us the ability to kind of run those statistics, see against a particular time frame. I can even draw heat maps up that show me exact geographic locations from which these failed sign-ins are occurring to give me the bigger picture. And in terms of like direct customer case study and story, I can't count the number of times that we've been engaged with our partners like DataLink and are talking to customers throughout these health checks and showcasing these failed sign-in reports. And in that call, before we've ever talked about exchanging a dollar, in that call, we're able to identify some issue or some user that needs to be blocked or some specific thing that needs to be addressed, red flag on that call. So it's a really, really useful thing to get immediate, basically ROI from what we're offering. And it's an important topic, right? So I'll jump back into our presentation, and I think we have a quick poll question for you, just to keep things engaged. So we're thinking about 4 major areas of security here, strong passwords, multi-factor authentication, email security, login attacks, etc. So which of the following should a company have in place? Would you say A, all companies should have strong password requirements? B, password expiration policies maybe? C, multi-factor authentication for every single user? D, external email forwarding prevention? Or E, some sort of XDR solution? And I believe your poll should be a multi-select, so you can select all the ones that you think are relevant or apply here. So yeah, how many of these areas do you think the average organization struggles with? All right. So it looks like it's a pretty multicolored field here. So lots of selections for strong password requirements, obviously over 50% there, about 40 or so percent for expiration policies for passwords, a little over 50% for MFA, slightly less, 31% for external email forwarding prevention, and then less than 20% for an actual separate XDR solution. So that's actually pretty interesting. Colby, any thoughts on these results?
Absolutely. What it says is across the board, I think there's a little bit of concern. One thing that we have noticed in our years using CoreView is that there is no single issue that stands out amongst the rest. I think most companies are trying to tackle more than one, and in that process, they're also trying to figure out which vendors to go with to handle these solutions. Fortunately enough, CoreView allows for you to kind of, as you said, Roy, address a couple of these solutions just by taking the first step and finding out what actually the problem is, and then from there, you can figure out how big of a problem it may be by using CoreView as well. The other aspect that I think we'll get into a little more is the actual reporting. With CoreView, you're allowed to, and not allowed to, but I guess you have the ability to not only see these things, but you have actionable items and things that you can make changes right away regarding. So if it's a password that a password expiration policy that you'd like to put in place, you can set a report that will be sent to you or whomever is in charge of that every single month if needed. That can tell you, hey, this set of users is set to have their passwords expire. Let's make sure that we're on that. Or this set of users have expired passwords and it hasn't changed. And the same goes for strong passwords as well, right, Roy?
Absolutely, yeah. So earlier I mentioned G.I. Joe with knowing is half the battle. Well, if knowing and identifying is half the battle, the other half is obviously being able to take the action on that knowledge, right? Don, any thoughts on any of this?
Well, the one thing I would point out is that different industries have different requirements. And so your education verticals are going to be different than, say, your banking or healthcare verticals. And that depends upon both the workforce that you have and the individual and industry compliance requirements that you have to meet. So
Absolutely.
there is no really one right size, but when we look at this, it really is a combination of the technology that you put in and then the policies that you develop and the enforcement that comes out of that. And that's where CoreView can really help with the visibility and the enforcement of those policies.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. So let's just jump a little farther in. So regarding the topic of passwords, for instance, in our subset, in our data set that we pulled, again, 17% of all the companies that we polled were requiring password, strong passwords for all of their users, and only 10% that had 1,000 plus without strong password requirements. I mean, those sound like small numbers, but again, we're polling a huge number of industries across all verticals. It's kind of alarming to know that there's that much, because 17% for a 500 user company is one thing, but when you're talking at the 10 to 40 plus thousand user enterprises, those numbers can really add up. But it's interesting to see that those tendencies are ubiquitous. On the expiration side, again here, just 90% of all companies that we polled, at least, had at least one user that didn't have password expiration policy in place. 32% of which had more than 10 users without a password expiration policy in place. That's basically 1 in 45 users don't have some sort of expiration policy at all. Why is that relevant? Why does that matter? Well, if your password's never expiring, I mean, just to put it very simply, obviously that's an extended potentiality for breach, right? That just makes it that much simpler over time for brute force to attain that password or figure out that password or bypass it. So these were alarming statistics for us. On the multi-factor authentication side, because a password's one thing, but really in today's modern age, as critical as the password is, it's really MFA that brings it to the next level for cloud security. And that's obviously the ability to have a secondary methodology for justifying authentication before you get through. The numbers here were equally surprising, right? Again, 22% of all the companies that we polled lacked any multi-factor authentication for over a third of their users. They had no third-party solution, no nothing. 87% of those had MFA, but it was disabled for some or all of their admins. Now, this is unique because it's one thing to have MFA disabled for your end user base, but for administrators to have no strength in their authentication